What are the ramifications of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and other aspects of the Trump administration on American life? Join Richard Epstein and me and special guest Jim Bovard as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principal case for the libertarian philosophy and has for many, many years. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Epstein, who teaches economics at the Citadel, and we're also have the honor of having Jim Bovard on as a special guest and sort of semi-co-host. Jim, you've been with
All right.
you've been writing here for the Future of Freedom Foundation for what, 80, 90 years, something like that.
Something like that, and it's I still have confidence that I'm on the edge of converting you. So,
Well, yeah, no, just keep trying. I think you're getting closer. There's no question
well,
about it.
I'm just doing God's work. That's all I can say.
Well, Jim, it's always good to have you on here to bring us your wisdom and your insights about Washington. I know you're a big fan of the federal government and all the politicians in Washington. And so it's always good to periodically have you back to Libertarian Angle to give us your insights as to what's going on. I'll lead out by saying that, your great book that's there in your background there, The Fair Trade Fraud, was written, what, 25 years ago or so?
35, but what
35.
the hell?
Yeah, but it's
Didn't do a
still...
damn bit of good in the last
No, it
few
really
years.
didn't.
That's okay. It's like all this evidence. No. We're gonna make America great again. So and it's fascinating. This is something that Richard could riff on. Is that it looks to me like the Trump people are doing exactly what FDR did with this faith that higher prices are going to make America rich. Because that's what the farm program was in 1933. That's why they were killing the pigs and plowing up the cotton. Higher prices going to make us rich. So,
Well, I think you've misunderstood, Jim. You've had a great and powerful effect. They saw the title of your book and said, "That's what we want. We want fair trade." And we've had
fraud
it
is
up
what they
until
want.
now.
Fraud is what they want. I mean, and trade policy, it's by the bucketful, or by the taco full, I guess. Trump always chicks out, so unfortunately, not true. So.
Well, so I'm curious how that makes you feel, though. You wrote this book. It's a masterful book. It's a timeless book. People ought to buy it right now if you want to know the virtues of free trade. And yet, how does it make you feel that we're right back to where we started back when you were writing this 35 years ago with Trump's tariff policies and trade wars and trade deficit nonsense and stuff? I mean, how does it make you feel?
And people wonder why I drink. No, I mean, it's sort of like you've had enough experience that in public policy, it's like it's a couple different things. One is like it's a labor of Sisyphus, because you're always because you have to go and refight the same battles. It's a little bit like a First World War trench warfare, where you go and capture a trench. You think people are persuaded, then another politician comes forward, and you get pushed back. You got to go back and try and reconquer the same territory. But it's fascinating to me to see almost a collapse of economic literacy among conservatives. Because back at the time I was coming of age in the 70s and 80s, Milton Friedman was treated like a god. Hayek was treated like a god by people that were even more savvy, as von Mises as well. And there seemed to be a basic understanding that free markets were the path to prosperity and a safeguard of liberty. And now you've got people like Senator Hawley out there wanting to bring back usury laws and just so many bizarre interventions. And I always go back when the bottom line for the Trump folks is these folks want the government in charge of damn near everything, including prices, because that's what you have when you have the government controlling imports. And I think back to my times when I spent a lot of time in the Commerce Department writing about some of their cases for the Wall Street Journal and other places. There were all these tired old guys walking down the hallway with their coffee cup, and it seems like that the seat of their pants was always down to their knees. And these are the wizards who are running the world economy at this point, and it makes no sense at all. And but there are so many people who are profiting from this. And it's also like it is as if the standards of opposition have also fallen. It's like, okay, you look at the meat and potatoes. What is the government doing on trade policy? People aren't focusing on that. Instead, it's like, well, Trump says this, the opposition says that. What I did with the fair trade fraud, what exactly is the government doing, and what is their rationale? I mean, that is how you crush protectionism. You show what the government did, why it did it, and why it's so frickin' stupid.
Um, I wanted, before we started, I started asking a question that is sort of the broader picture before perhaps we talk about more of these policy details. Donald Trump has now been on the American political stage for 10 years, give or take. And when he ran first time in 2016, uh, many Republicans obviously opposed him and didn't want him. There were this slew of many candidates running that year, the best and the brightest the Republican Party had offered in decades. Certainly, the Democrats and the left abhorred him and never thought that he could be elected president. You can see these clips on YouTube where they're
Yep.
laughing, "Oh, he'll never be president." Uh, and in spite of being defeated in 2020, uh, he makes his comeback, and he has these hero worshiping hordes of followers, and how many Republicans just have bent over and given in to everything he wants, including on these policy issues that were often the opposite for them just a couple of decades ago. Do you have any, a little of your own personal psychobabble on the appeal and the power and the charismatic uh, influence that this man seems to have?
Charismatic is not a term I would have thought of with Trump, but I think it's an apt term for a lot of his followers. Keep in mind, I mean, Trump won in 2016 in large part because he was running against Hillary Clinton, who was one of the most loathed American politicians to ever run for a major party nomination. So, and she was a horrible candidate, and she had all kinds of lies that were leaking out thanks to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and other places. You had the Clinton Foundation that was just as corrupt as the day is long, and she was so incredibly arrogant. I mean, she openly condemned Trump's supporters as deplorables, and that's like. So that was part of it. I mean, Trump has benefited from the people who hate him, and there's vast numbers of people who hate him I would guess all three of us would agree that a lot of the people who hate Trump hate him for the worst possible reasons, not because he's demagogic at times, not because he's seizing power, not because he's throwing America into foreign wars, but I mean. There was so much smugness in the Washington establishment and so much of a sense of a right and entitlement to rule not just this nation, but the world. And Trump has played off of that, and people thought that he was going to do something different. And there have been some issues that Trump did well on, in even the last 6 months, but they've been vastly overshadowed by his disasters and now by his cover up of one of the biggest pedophile scandals in American history.
Well, let me, since you raised that, what is your take on the Epstein thing? The news media, whether it be CNN or Fox, show these pictures when Trump obviously was a much younger man at some type of social events, standing next to even his arm around Epstein, as if this was some type of unique, sin. But I remember that when this scandal was first came up, when he was arrested and the business about his island and everything, there were these a wide array of photographs that he was with many politicians, many other public figures, left, right, and center, or non-political, but who had celebrity status, who were part of his cohorts, his acquaintances, his people who he shared certain perverse interests with, including British royalty.
Oh
So,
yes, they were.
so this idea that is just somehow Trump, and I understand why he's the focus, but this is such he sucked in a huge portion of the political American political establishment into his perverse web.
Right. And so let me clarify immediately here. I mean, what I was saying is that Trump is culpable on the cover up of Epstein,
Mhm.
including the cover up of how Epstein died. I'm not saying that Trump himself had sex with underage girls. I don't think that happened. I don't know for sure because almost all the evidence has been suppressed. But as far as how this is playing out, this is something that both you guys would understand because you know military history. And watching, seeing how the White House is playing this, it's sort of like the Japanese admirals on the morning of June 4th, 1942, at the Battle of Midway. You had one wave after another of American torpedo planes and other attack planes, and attacked, and the Japanese carriers were having to swing around left and right, and it threw them off from being able to launch an attack against the American carriers. But each time another wave of American planes failed or they had bad torpedoes. It was bonsai, bonsai, we've won, we've won. And then all of a sudden, was it around 10:20 or something like that morning, you got the dive bombers coming in from overhead, and within about 5 minutes, three out of the four Japanese carriers are destroyed. And I think that could be what could happen to the Trump administration. Trump is covering up so much information. Trump has been so arrogant in this. And if you look, there was that bizarre statement from the White House about 2 weeks ago. It said, there was unsigned from the FBI and the Justice Department, a page and a half, we have looked into this and let us assure you there is nothing to see. Move along. But it's even worse than that because the only specific detail that they had was the new proof they offered that Epstein had not been murdered, and that was here's the raw video from the prison that night, and watch this, and it proves that he wasn't murdered. And so it starts out bad. You had Stephen Nelson, New York Post guy, ask Trump and Bondi, Attorney General, at a hearing and at a session about a missing minute. And you got the Attorney General there saying, well, of course there was a missing minute. There's always a missing minute on prison videos because what they do is run it over again, and every night it's the same time of missing minute. So there's nothing to see here. Of course there's a missing minute. And then Wired magazine comes in. Oh, actually, it's three missing minutes. And I was watching some other stuff on how Epstein died, and it didn't even have a ceiling or a high bed for him to tie his bed sheets on. It was like it was basically at the level of his butt. And so he tied up and he leaned forward. And what, did he hop for 10 minutes or what? Michael Moore had one of the best comments after he died. He said, here's a guy who never did anything for himself. He had servants to even practically tie his own shoes. And you think he knew how to tie a noose? So, I mean, but there's these levels of bullshit. And it's funny, there was an interview of Tucker Carlson and Trump before Trump was elected, and Carlson's pushing him on the Epstein's death. And Trump says, yeah, it was pretty suspicious. Cameras went out, guards fell asleep, this happened, that happened. Yeah, pretty suspicious. Not anymore. Trump has sprinkled his holy water on the death of Epstein and all the official storyline. Again, it doesn't prove Epstein was murdered. It doesn't prove Trump had anything to do with it. And it was just a coincidence that the Attorney General at that time, that Epstein died, was the same guy who covered up the Ruby Ridge killing of Vicki Weaver, but that's a different story.
Now,
But so, but to see Trump embrace this storyline, and so there was a New York Times piece which fascinated me. It was on Saturday that talking about the long relationship between Trump and Epstein. There was one line very late in the story, and it talked about how in 2009, 2008 or 2009, the federal government gave immunity to Jeffrey Epstein and all of his co-conspirators. Now, Jacob could comment on this. He's a criminal defense lawyer. He whipped the DEA in federal court. So, have you ever heard of the federal government giving blanket immunity to a class of horrendous criminals who have not offered anything in return? It wasn't like that they were given evidence on Epstein because all the charges were dropped. And, the New York Times gave immunity to Epstein and all of the other co-conspirators. You had a number of guys there who diddled young girls. And it's in the videos or there's other proof. To say it's all these hundreds of guys, I think is wildly exaggerated. You might have 10, you might have 15, maybe there's more than that. But you had the evidence, and you had the federal government give blanket immunity to all the co-conspirators. Why did they do that?
Well, I think we need to emphasize that we don't really know who those co-conspirators were. I mean,
The federal government did.
well, yeah, I mean, but they did. These were unnamed co-conspirators that they were given immunity to. And
Yes.
we don't know who the heck was guilty as far as the pedophilia goes, except Epstein.
Yes.
We know he was guilty. We know Maxwell pleaded guilty to facilitating it in some way. But what I find fascinating is that there's a lot of people that were presumably involved in this that we don't know who those are. And so
Yep.
you're right. It's very bizarre to grant immunity to people that are not publicly being indicted and seeking immunity. They're just like you get the sense that they're being protected with
No.
this.
No, I am shocked. I mean, this is a shocking loss of faith in the justice system. But it was. I mean, I'd read about this before, but to see that one sentence, it snapped my head back because it's like, yeah, this is the whole story. I mean, Epstein was a horrendous person. He did terrible things, and he certainly deserved harsh punishment. But you had this entire class of people who were his co-conspirators. And why were they whitewashed?
Well, you
Well,
this is the thing, Jim. The entire basis of the scandal this right now in the media around Trump is that if Trump himself did not do something wrong, uh, or in some way attempt to do something to help Epstein not be found guilty at some point, or he's protecting friends of his who might have directly or indirectly be involved in Epstein, why would he be attempting to have his Justice Department do all these things? You see, methinks he protesteth too much.
Way too much.
well, the thing about that fascinates me is that you've got a federal prosecutor who could have put this guy away for life. I mean, there was no question. They got tons of evidence against this guy of abusing young girls whose lives were really damaged irreparably, psychologically, emotionally. Any regular person would have been looking at life in prison without possibility of parole. Instead, the federal prosecutor, and what I think is the most bizarre plea bargain I've ever heard of, defers to the state prosecutor and says, we're going to hand this case over to you all, which is very bizarre because usually it's the other way around. The feds want control so they get the notch in their belts for the conviction. This time it's transferred to the state. And the plea bargain is that the guy gets 13 months in jail. And
Well,
even
sort
though,
of in jail. I mean, a few hours a day at least there.
well, it was worse than that. He would be let out in the morning and be free to do his business all afternoon, all morning,
Yep.
all day, and
Yep.
then just return to spend the night.
Yep.
So what he was really doing, just sleeping, and it was the county jail. It wasn't even the state penitentiary. Well, to me, this means big power. Somebody is very, very powerful, or people are very powerful, very influential, most likely very wealthy, that they're able to push this type of thing on. The other fascinating thing was that statement by Acosta, the prosecutor, indicating that at least it's a purported statement. I don't know if they've got him on tape or anything, but saying that Epstein had ties to intelligence and that he should leave him alone. Well, that to me would explain it even better than very powerful, wealthy private
Yep.
individuals. That if this
Yep.
guy's tied in with the Mossad and the CIA, which to me are joined at the hip, and they say shut this thing down, you know darn well that every prosecutor in this land is going to say shut it down.
Not everyone. I think there were some that would have died on that hill. But what's fascinating is that Trump is telling all of his supporters to die on the hill, that Trump is completely innocent, and it doesn't matter how many times Trump changes his story. The most recent version is sacrosanct, and if you don't believe it, then you're not MAGA. I mean, it brings to mind what Hannah Arendt wrote, I think, in Totalitarianism. Richard would know this better than I do, about how the ultimate triumph of totalitarianism is that you have total control over people's minds, and they will say whatever the big brother wants them to say, regardless of what they previously said or what they actually believe.
Right. Yeah, the sense of a loyalty in the communist form, that the party can never be wrong. And even if you have doubts, you have to erase those doubts, because to disagree with the party is, in a sense, to somehow disown your very sense of identity and purpose and loyalty. And it's a cult of the personality, like Stalin had, or Hitler had. And you're right. People just feel they have to fall in line. They can't question, because then they're thrown out of the political Garden of Eden, out of which they sense they would have no identity or fulfillment.
And there's an interesting parallel here along those lines. I mean, to see what Trump did when this scandal first re-erupted, Trump, it didn't matter what Trump had said for the previous 10 years about how he's going to open these files and how he's going to bring these people to justice. All of a sudden, the issue is closed, move along. And he was expecting his followers to react the same way that Communist Party members did in August 1939 when the Nazi Soviet non-aggression pact was announced. Because overnight, the vast majority of communists just kind of like, okay, fine, we are no longer anti-Hitler. And Trump seemed, I guess Trump thought he could pull off the same thing. Maybe he will. I don't know.
Well, I think one of his best tools is Exile, where he's telling his MAGA supporters, if you don't support me on this, you're out. You're a former supporter. And I think that terrifies your average MAGA supporter, because he wants to be part of the group. To be exiled from the MAGA group, I think, is terrifying for these MAGA people. And I think Trump knows that. And so he's pulling that card of saying, you better get in line here. We're not going to disclose these records, and you're going to have to support me on this thing, or you're not going to be part of the group anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been following Trump's Truth Social posts, which get longer and longer, and something which I really took personally. Trump came out and condemned troublemakers. I mean, so I mean, this is going after me where I live.
No,
You?
Well,
no, Jim, part of the effect of this scandal is that it has pushed other things that have been going on recently, and his array of policies, off the front page. And of course, just a month ago, 2 weeks ago, a major issue in terms of administration was his big, beautiful bill. And the idea that this was going to make one of the elements to make America great again. He cuts $9 billion of spending, like NPR and so on, but adds over $3 trillion to the accumulated debt over the next 10 years. Uh, and I'm wondering if you could give your perspective on this in terms of the long run impact of his first 6 months in these fiscal matters.
well, I mean, he's so proud of having the first $1 trillion Pentagon budget. I mean, that's certainly going to make us prosper. So it's this is a good example to go back to what Jacob said earlier about the fair trade fraud. I mean, this big, beautiful bill is a great example of how people simply ignored the details. Instead, it was a couple catchphrases, it was some rallies, it was this, it was social media talking points, and people did not look at the meat and potatoes of the bill. And it's appalling to see so many conservatives jumping on this bandwagon when there are so many horrendous ideas in this. And it's just there have been so many lessons about the failure of government policy that have simply been expunged seemingly in the last 6 months. And we're supposed to think that Trump is Midas and that that Trump can just sprinkle his holy water or just touch something and cure all these federal programs. I mean, Trump has had some good people in the past in this first term, but he basically threw them overboard, and he doesn't seem at all. I mean, um, seeing some of his picks, it's just like, um, it's amazing to see the intellectual caliber of a lot of his team. But then I said the same thing about Joe Biden. So,
Well, what shocked me was when he was willing to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. I mean, I thought, my gosh, you've got out of control federal spending. How is this different from Biden? I don't get it. I don't see how it's different at all. Let me shift gears a bit here. What do you make of this whole Ukraine? What seems to be a 180-degree turn on Trump's part?
that was one of the issues that Trump seemed most promising on. Biden was veering closer and closer to war with Russia over Ukraine, and the Biden people were lying to us up and down and back and forth. There was a New York Times had a great story a couple months ago about how the Biden people had sold, how the Biden intervention was far greater than what the media reported or the Biden people admitted. And so the Biden folks were concerned about comparisons to South Vietnam because they were sending over so many military advisors to Kiev. And so what the Biden administration did was say, okay, these are not military advisors, these are just subject matter experts. That was the literal phrase that they used. And it's like you're reading that in the New York Times and you're thinking, God, the bullshit was so much deeper than I suspected. I don't know. It just Biden just seems Biden was a loose cannon. Biden was a tool. Trump seems increasingly like a loose cannon on foreign policy. Trump's best line in 2016 was condemning trigger happy Hillary, because Hillary Clinton had helped drag the U.S. into numerous foreign disasters. And he was claiming that he wasn't going to do that, but tell that to the Iranians. So
Yeah.
Well, I think that part of the thing with Ukraine is that it isn't so much he's in some principled or dogmatic way against supporting Ukraine. He just doesn't want to do what he considers to be Biden's giveaway. We just gave them these Patriot
oh,
missiles. We just
oh,
gave them the ammunition. Freebies. But if they'll pay for it or give us these monopoly concessions over rare earth metals, well, then it's a deal. It's a deal. And
yeah. Well,
there's
I
nothing else
mean,
behind it.
well, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, sunk cost is the term that would come to mind here, and it's a heap of sunk bodies as well. But Trump and this notion, his trying to do that deal with the minerals, it was interesting to see some of his supporters like Steve Bannon saying, "Hey, this is a horrible idea. Let's just get the hell out of there," and it's crap that we're ever going to be turn a profit on this. It, it's it's sad to see how much secrecy and double dealing he's getting away with, but I felt that way for quite a few presidents. So,
Well, the thing that concerned me was when he said to Zelensky, who he had humiliated and ostracized there in the White House and stuff, and all of a sudden he says, "Can these long-range missiles hit cities inside Russia or something?" But then he really clarified and said, "Well, I'm not saying you should do that, but."
ah, ah,
I mean, it's like, if
oh,
they start firing US made missiles into Moscow and St. Petersburg or something like that, there's no telling how Russia's going to react.
well, Russia would react very badly. But here again, I mean, it's simple prudence. I mean, it's a horrible war. Both sides share some of the blame, and U.S. has simply made it so much worse. And it's complete BS that U.S. can, lead to the high ground or whatever. We should just get that. Well, it's the same as almost every other foreign conflict. Let's just get the hell out. So,
All right, let's
except for
shift.
except for Gaza.
All right, let's shift gears again. How about his pressuring Powell on interest rates and his threat to fire Powell? Give us your perspective on that.
But I mean, Trump has just gone so far in so many things. I mean, Trump thinks he's got a right to control everything. There was in his first month or so, he tweeted out a quote from Napoleon. He said, "For the savior of his country, there is no law." And this is how Trump views his own power. And I mean, he's got a lot of horrible ideas on economic policy. And Trump thinks that Trump would sell everything out to create a short-term appearance of prosperity. And that's why he would, it's the same as what Lyndon Johnson did. There was a wonderful vignette. Richard knows this better than I do about how the president of the Fed was in Martin, visited LBJ on his ranch, and President Johnson literally beat the guy, saying that his troops were dying in Vietnam. He had to lower interest rates. And that was, this is what Trump would like to do, but there's probably too many witnesses to take him out to a ranch and beat up the Fed chairman. I don't like the Fed chairman. I don't like what they've done. I think they've helped wreck the housing market. But, all of a sudden to have artificially low interest rates. Congressman Massey made an interesting point. It's possible the Fed could cut interest rates and interest rates would not fall because of the foreign demand of what the interest rate has to be to service U.S. Debt. So Richard would know more about that.
Well, the thing is that the way Trump talks about it, just yesterday or the day before, interest rates should be 1%.
Oh,
Think
he
of all
said
the
that?
Americans. Yes, he said
Oh
that.
my God.
How many Americans could finally buy a house? And we would save $1 trillion on servicing the debt. There, I'd be able to cut $1 trillion of government spending right there. Now, notice the mindset. The interest rate is just an artificial number to him. The idea that the interest rate is a price, that it is meant to serve an economic function of balancing people's savings in society with estimated and appraised possible profit investment opportunities has no meaning to him. He just views it as something to manipulate it for, as you're saying, a short-term gain and to be looking good. The idea that would require a further massive increase in the money supply to keep the rate of interest at that level and to feed all the borrowing that he wants just eludes him. The inflationary dangers are immense, but he has no capacity to understand this. His economic ignorance is infinite.
Yeah, see, I mean, think of how much better off America would be if Donald Trump had gone to Virginia Tech instead of University of Pennsylvania. I was at Tech, well, briefly in the mid 70s, and they had James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock there at the Public Choice Center. They had bought them from UVA. And, it was possible to get some very good ideas there. I mean, but it's the same way with Trump and his people bragging about the increase in federal revenue from tariffs. It's like, oh, we got extra X number of billion. And I'm thinking like, yeah, so what? You pulled it out of your backside? I mean, these are taxes. These are going to be multiplying. They are sowing so many seeds of disruption, and the tariff victory proclamations. They're as idiotic as the proclamations on victory over Epstein. People don't care about that anymore. The tariffs aren't going to have any adverse impact. It's like, I don't know. I mean, some days I almost get cynical.
Yeah,
Go
but let me Yeah, but
ahead.
let me tell you something about your fair trade fraud book and the whole tariff controversy. The thing that I've noticed that really lifts my spirits is that the mainstream press has been filled with commentaries, op-eds, editorials favoring free trade. I mean, I have found that an absolutely phenomenal development, something I didn't expect. So there has been a lot of pushback on Trump. Now, clearly Trump is protectionist, but I don't get that sentiment out there in America. It seems to me that in this area, libertarians, including you with your fair trade book, have made tremendous progress in making people aware of the virtues of free trade. Do you see it
And
differently?
and what are the tariff levels right now?
Yeah, but that's because of Trump. But I'm saying that there's a lot of pushback from mainstream papers that I didn't expect
I
and
agree.
commentators.
Okay, it doesn't surprise me that most of the mainstream outlets are pushing back on this. First of all, a lot of them are anti-Trump, and second, this is a really stupid idea by Trump. Um, I think I read we've got the highest average tariff level in this country since 1935. Does that sound? Yeah, and it's like, and to see how Trump in one of his April press conferences was saying that that the Great Depression happened because the tariffs were too low, and if he's still allowed to comment on the topic in public, it's like um, it's it's like Joe Biden on a bad day. So.
The thing is on this is that just as he has this notion that the interest rate is just a number to set to look good and has no economic role or function or rationale, this is part of his attitude about tariffs. He doesn't like the way he perceives the president of Brazil, Lula, who is a commie pinko, treating his predecessor, who was a friend of Trump's. And suddenly Trump says, I am going to set a 50% tariff on goods coming from Brazil. I mean, this is democratic despotism. And why do I say democratic despotism? Because what does he insist? I won the majority of the popular vote of the Electoral College. Both houses of Congress went for my party. I am representing and reflecting the people's will, and therefore I have the mandate to do anything I want as I think is necessary in any arbitrary fashion. It's democratic despotism.
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with your last word. I'm not sure about the first one. I mean, Trump seems to believe that he's entitled to unlimited power over everything, including the tariff levels. And it's funny, so many people cheering him on. It's like, so are you going to give your kids orange juice in the morning? That tariff would be 50%. Most of our orange juice comes from Brazil. How about coffee? Coffee prices have already skyrocketed. I mean, it might even be enough to wake up some of the Starbucks customers.
Well, remember, when he was asked about, won't these tariffs affect dolls from China that the kids get at
Oh,
Christmas time? Oh, well, they don't need to have so many dolls.
yeah. Well, it's always good
Give
to
me
have
a
some
break
dude on.
here.
Yeah, it's great to have some dude living on Fifth Avenue telling, farm families in Iowa how many toys their kids should have.
Exactly.
But I mean, there is just it's frustrating to see how little. I mean, Jacob, I agree that there's been a lot of good criticism on the trade stuff and on some other issues, but the vast majority of Trump's boondoggles and horrible ideas are going unchallenged, and he has changed the consensus to a degree. But I also Trump could get crippled at almost any point because there are so many people, there are so many files. So Senator Durbin was saying that the Trump people had deployed 1,000 FBI agents and employees to go around these 300,000 pages of files 24/7 for more than a month to get to get every mention of Trump. So if I wanted to do a cover up, I sure as hell would not pull out every mention of my name and say, "Oh, here's the concordance." But don't worry, nobody's going to see it. It's like, okay, what's your next great idea? They they haven't realized how much danger they're in, and if Trump is exposed as even more involved in the cover up or worse, I mean, this is he's lost a lot of core support. People, and even his supporters don't trust him as much as they used to, many of them. So
Well,
Well,
the easiest thing to do would be just release all the records, release all
I
the
agree.
investigative files. I mean, just release them. And the fact that he doesn't do that after talking about draining the swamp and changing the establishment and attacking the deep state and all this, I just sit there and befuddlement. Why not just say, open up everything? Let
Ah!
I mean, if
I mean,
you want to redact the names of the girls, okay, I don't have a problem
oh
with
yeah, yeah,
that.
sure. I mean, to the underage victims need to be protected, but it's worse than that because you were saying draining the swamp. So what happened is he started to drain the swamp, and then he saw a mirror, and then he went with that. So he could still do it, but it's great to see the governor of Florida joining that. Say, hey, let's make all this public. However, it's possible that Trump knows so much more than we do on this, and that he realizes that hey, there's something here that could so completely destroy me and many of my biggest donors, and maybe some of my allies. But he's willing to totally sacrifice the transparency of the U.S. government. At the same time, that memo, unsigned memo, starts out saying, as part of our commitment to transparency, we ain't telling you shit. So,
Well, he's been very upset. His supporters have been very upset that when they've tried to call to the committees, these people who have worked in the Biden administration, uh, tell us when and how much you knew about the president being brain dead and when,
uh-huh.
and the Fifth Amendment, or I won't agree to testify. It's easy to imagine that next year, in the elections, the Democrats take one or both houses of Congress. And if they do, you just know that they're going to have the position to hold hearings. And they're going to want to know a whole bunch of things, such as this scandal or many other things. And then now the shoe's going to be on the other foot when they try to bring people to testify. And suddenly the Trump people will be the ones saying, I take the fifth, or I have president, confidential immunity, or et cetera.
Yep.
And it's going
Yep.
to come back on them.
Well, and it's possible even before then Trump could be impeached. So Trump's got a narrow margin of the GOP's got a narrow margin in the House, and Trump is infuriating more and more Republicans. I mean, to see him trying to destroy Congressman Massey, to see the vilification today, I think he was saying that he's really lazy, doesn't do anything, and I'm thinking like, yeah, well, that's the last congressman I'd say that about. But Trump keeps doubling down, and again, it goes back to the my analogy of the Japanese carriers at Midway. Yeah, you've dodged this torpedo, you've dodged that one, and there's every time Trump has activated that whole scandal by his condemnations and his denials. He's made it far more volatile. He's encouraging some of the best journalists and the best media outlets in the country to go on a jihad to try to find out what he did, or find out who it was who covered up Epstein and all of his co-conspirators. And if and when they do that, it could be a hell of a lot more explosive than anything that's happened so far.
Well, let me sort of just follow your comment up with a hypothetical. You had said we could even imagine him being impeached. Let's suppose that
Prior
were to
to the
happen.
next House election.
Okay, let's suppose that were to happen, and Vance becomes president.
Okay.
From what your read and impressions, how would you view a Vance presidency?
So I went, the American Conservative has an annual dinner, or used to, maybe they still do, maybe I don't get invited, but it was, I think, either late 2018 or 2019 in some nice restaurant or whatever in DC, nice hotel. And the keynote speaker was Vance. He was not yet a senator. And Vance was talking about some of the moral issues, and he sounded good and credible. Some things I think both y'all would agree on. And then he shifted to economic policy. And Vance explained that the real problem with economic policy in Washington was that it was dominated by libertarians. And so I'm not kidding. And I was sitting there, I had about two or three beers, but I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet. But he was just, and it was just blaming all these libertarians for the economic policy. And I'm thinking like, this is during the first Trump administration. I'm thinking, oh man, I did not see that coming. But there's a lot of conservatives who feel that way, and I don't know if Vance is savvy on economics. I think you would have a better sense of that. I think he might be less of a warmonger. But then people said the same about Trump compared to Biden and Hillary. So I don't know. I mean, Trump is doing horrendous damage to his brand, and at some point, he could pull down, could cripple the Republican Party the same way that Nixon did with Watergate. So
All
Uh,
right. Well, yeah, go ahead, Richard.
I would just say the difficulty of reading Vance is that you watch how he works so hard to be a sycophant whenever he's in Trump's company. He's out trumping Trump, like the lapdog who anticipates the master's words and instructions and tries to say them first. So to figure out whether Vance would, in spite of your comment about that speech he gave, would be better or worse than Trump on economic policy is very difficult to determine from his public statements on these issues over the last 6 months. On foreign policy, he seems to uh, want to distance himself more from European engagements, at least. But it would be a big question mark as to what such an administration of his would be if Trump were to be impeached.
yes, and I want to say too there's it's often popular to talk about how the ideas of freedom are advancing, so on and so forth. Nothing personal, but it's been 45 years since we had a major party presidential candidate who championed freedom as their core principle. Not since Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign. In 1984, he was doing Morning in America. He said a little bit about freedom, but not nearly as much. It's been 45 years, and I have to wonder how much American values have changed. How many Americans still, the word freedom. I mean, keep in mind, Trump was promising to make America free again. He wasn't promising to make it. Trump was promising to make America great again. He wasn't promising to make it free or constitutional. And it just seemed like as time goes on, and more Americans become hooked on government handouts or on government subsidized student loans or farm loans or other stuff, mortgages. It just seems like the core support for freedom is a hell of a lot less than it used to be, and I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I hope you're wrong too. My hunch is that there may be a much bigger force under the surface that is just waiting for a catalyst to bring it to the top. And I don't have any proof of that, but libertarians have been working now for what, 60 years or so, in the think tank world, the educational foundation world, the policy world, like you do, Jim. I just can't help but believe that that's had an enormous impact, causing people to think, and that all that needs is a catalyst, and all of a sudden it's going to surface, and I think it's going to shock a lot of people. Can I prove that? No, but instinctively, I think that's the case.
What would the catalyst have to be?
We don't know. I don't think that's. I think that's impossible to predict.
Yeah.
Um, but you have to keep going with educating people on the right values, the right principles to be prepared for that event. Because the worst thing could happen is the event happens, the catalyst causes it to happen, and people are not prepared because everybody gave up and said, "Well, there's no point in this. We're sunk." And the fact that libertarians have continued steadfastly, continued promoting libertarianism, I think has been setting the groundwork, the foundation for that kind of event if it ever happens.
There was a wonderful one of my favorite New York Times headlines is from 30 years ago, and it was talking about one of the conflicts the Russians were having, and it said, "For Chechens in the mountains, fighting is winning." And I view it the same as fighting for freedom, because as long as we keep fighting, we haven't lost.
Yeah.
If I could just say in sort of as an example of what Jacob was saying about a catalyst, a victory for freedom, and going back to how we started with the trade issue. Um, there emerged a free trade movement in Great Britain uh, in the aftermath of the defeat of Napoleon. The British government had reinforced its trade protectionism in the post-war period of post-Napoleon War, known as the Corn Laws. But the free traders worked in the vineyard of public opinion from around 1815 to the 1840s, never having a major victory. Oh, a little lowering of a tariff here or there, but agricultural protectionism in particular for the aristocracy, not moving an inch. But they worked and they spread their ideas and they permeated more of the society with this idea that trade restrictions harmed the people, the poor. It kept food expensive rather than cheap. And then in 1845, 1846, the worst rains in living memory deluged the British Isles. The crops were destroyed. People were facing starvation, the famine in Ireland. And as a consequence, Parliament had to do something. And the Tory leader, who was put in power by the landed aristocracy to protect protectionism, admit that he had been won over, and like that, an act of parliament going through the three readings passed in June of 1846 unilateral agricultural free trade. And the food was there immediately for people to be saved from starvation. That's the kind of catalyst. Who could anticipate bad rains, but the intellectual climate having been nurtured so that when a disaster like that occurred, the movement would be towards more freedom rather than less?
That's a great example, and I hope we can add one to that record book from this country. So, because we need to have something, because the trend line has just been horrible for a long time here.
Oh, yes.
So,
All right. Well, on that uplifting note, inspiring note, we'll wrap things up. Jim, thanks so much. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Sorry we went over time, but as you could tell, we were having kind of a good time here. Hope you enjoyed the program. And Jim, I invite you to come back
well,
whenever.
thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Jacob, Richard, it's great to see y'all. Thanks for all the hell raising that y'all do. And next time we'll whip them.
Yeah, well, thank you for writing for the Future Freedom Foundation for 80 or 90 years, or
Something like that.
well, about 30 or so. And it's a big honor for us to have you writing for us. I know you
Thanks.
write for a lot of other very prestigious organizations, and we're just honored to have you associated with us. And Richard, as always, I greatly enjoyed the visit with you too.
Until next time, and let me thank you too, Jim.
All right. Thanks a lot.